Good day, and welcome to the Survivor's Guilt, Negative Feelings, and Despair Addressed conference call. Today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I would like to turn the conference over to Jennifer Gillette. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Yes, my name is Jennifer Gillette, and I'm the staff social worker at the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link. This month's program will focus on survivor's guilt, negative feelings, and despair. A special thank you to our sponsors for today's program, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, Insight Corporation, Pharmacyclics and Janssen, and Omeris Corporation. We also thank our esteemed link partners. Just so everyone knows how our program is going to go today, there's going to be a basic introduction, just a few minutes about nbmtLINK, and then we will have our first professional speaker, Shirley Otis-Green, who will talk for about 20 minutes. And then we will have our survivor speaker, Bridget Casey, who will be speaking about 10 minutes. And then we're going to open up the floor for both pre-submitted and live questions. And then we'll just wrap up with a couple closing points. For those of you who may not be familiar with the National Bone Marrow Transplant Link, I want to let you know that our mission is dedicated to helping individuals and their families from diagnosis through survivorship. We provide resources, support, and education. Some of the resources we provide to help families navigate their transplant journey are webinars, podcasts, blogs, lunch and learn calls like you're on today, and these can be on a variety of topics such as chronic graft versus host disease, disease-specific information, caregiving, coping, treatment options, and survivorship after a transplant. We have an active Facebook page with daily inspiration and relevant tips for survivorship, as well as our peer support mentor program for patients, caregivers, and donors. We have our second birthdays recognition program where you get honored on your transplant day each year, and we have books, referrals, and emotional support from a licensed social worker. Please feel free to reach out to us if you are interested in any of our services. Before we begin today's program, I would like to review just a few housekeeping items to maximize the experience of all on the call. Please be mindful in being concise with questions so that we may answer as many as possible today. Also, please know that the information provided in this program is meant to stimulate conversation with you and your own healthcare providers and is not meant to replace your individualized medical plan. So now on to the educational part of our program. We are so thankful to have our first speaker here with us today, Shirley Otis-Green. She is a social worker that is very credentialed, and she is dedicated to enhancing excellence in the delivery of contextualized care to address the symptoms and stress of serious illness. Her education, research, and consultation efforts have led her to become an internationally recognized speaker on the quality of life, palliative care, leadership development, and the creation of meaningful organizational change. As a principal investigator on studies with over $3.5 million in external funding, her work has been recognized with numerous awards and disseminated through more than 100 publications and 500 professional presentations. She is a California Healthcare Foundation Leadership Fellow, serves on several editorial and professional boards, and is a distinguished social work practitioner in the National Academies of Practice. Shirley was among the first to receive an International Interprofessional Master of Arts in Health Research, Palliative Care from Lancaster University in Great Britain, and is co-editor of the Oxford Textbook of Palliative Social Work. So in other words, there is no one more qualified to talk to you on this today. Shirley, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's a real gift to be able to speak with you today, and again, I appreciate the opportunity. When I was asked to consider our topic, I have to admit I was a bit daunted because survivor's guilt is such a potentially fraught experience for anyone who might be experiencing it, and it has so many different components to consider. One of the things that when I hear the word survivor's guilt, that I focus on the first word, survivor, and that implies that others have not. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of that feeling, that recognition of one's own mortality and the mortality of perhaps friends or family members, that sense of how am I so fortunate to have escaped a fate that others did not escape? You know, what is it about my experience and my situation that was life-saving when other people who perhaps were equally deserving were not so fortunate? So it invites us to think about grief. It invites us to be reflective. It invites us to consider the possibility that our, quote, luck will run out, and to, again, consider the possibility that we, too, may not continue to survive, you know, in the future. So one of the things that I wanted to do when invited was to look at the literature and to remind myself of some of the studies that have been done in regard to understanding survivor's guilt. And a lot of that has been done with natural disasters, situations where there's a brief one-time occurrence. For example, a natural disaster could be here in California. We certainly have our share of them. So an earthquake, you know, if I'm one of the houses that is spared and my neighbor's house is destroyed, I might have, again, a classic situation where I might experience that sense of survivor's guilt. The same with our fires, or again, people that might live in hurricane areas or tornadoes, things where there seems to be almost a capricious sparing of one home and a destruction of another, where, you know, people sitting at a table are, you know, perfectly safe, and then other people that seem to be in much presumably safer situations are destroyed. And so it is a common reaction for folks under those kinds of circumstances. And the studies are really quite interesting as they look at how people respond to those kinds of situations. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from that. But on the other hand, cancer and survivor's guilt related to the experience of an illness that's chronic and ongoing, I think has some unique characteristics of its own. When we're a person going through a bone marrow transplant or living with, you know, a hematologic cancer, or maybe we have friends who are getting treatment and we learn to love them and look forward to seeing them when we go to the cancer center and they're struggling with perhaps a solid tumor or an experience similar but not quite the same as ours. We have the challenge in that it isn't just a single one-day event. It becomes something that, again, has chronic implications for us. So the survivor's guilt that we might have as a patient or a family member watching other people over a period of time in kind of a slow motion catastrophe, I think is still, again, uniquely different from the more commonly studied, at least, natural disaster situation. But there are certain elements, though, that I think, again, apply to both of these characteristics. And when we are experiencing survivor guilt, we are having, again, an invitation to look at our own life experience, and we tell ourselves narratives about that. We are a meaning-making species. So one of the things that is just the hallmark of being human is we try to make sense of whatever happens to us. We try to create a narrative, a story that we tell ourselves about why something happened. And sometimes that story is intertwined with cultural or spiritual beliefs that we might have inherited from our social situation. We might feel that the reason I was spared and someone else wasn't is that was God's will. And then if that's the narrative that we have for ourselves, we might dedicate ourselves then to doing something to honor those whose lives were lost, and dedicate ourselves, in our faith to try and create and live a life that is purposeful and meaningful and gives testament or testimony to those beliefs. Conversely, a person might experience a situation where they've survived while others haven't, and they find themselves feeling devastated by that because they're unable to craft a narrative that helps them to make sense of that experience. And it is not uncommon for people who've had some kind of a situation where survivor's guilt is really painful and becomes chronic, and the person is really struggling, for that person to have despair, and perhaps that despair to turn into something that might be considered a response to a traumatic event that can be so devastating as to become depression and perhaps even homicidal or suicidal thoughts. People sometimes react in really profoundly distressing ways when they're not able to craft a narrative of why they are spared and why someone else might not be. Sometimes they feel unworthy and that, again, they were meant to have died, and, again, to take actions that can be quite extreme. So there's this whole gamut from people who go through a traumatic event, who potentially, again, were in a life-threatening situation where they felt that their mortality was in jeopardy. And there are some folks who are able to process that, make sense of that in some way for themselves, and be able to survive and perhaps even to thrive, while others are really struggling. And so this is a really important topic, and one that, again, I think is important for us to address and to explore. So I look forward to the questions that might come up later in our conversation, and the opportunity to learn from our other speaker as well. Bridget's going to share her story as well with us. One of the things that is a normal aspect of this experience is, again, listed in our title, the idea of negative feelings. And that, too, is really a part of our narrative, right? How do we describe our feelings? Sometimes we have words that could seem somewhat pejorative, right? That these are the good feelings and these are the bad feelings. And arguably, feelings are just feelings. It's our decision of how we label them. But certainly it would be normal for a person to have profoundly strong feelings from learning that a loved one, a friend, again, a family member has had a negative experience in their life. Again, if somebody that you cared about and met regularly through your cancer experience, and you learn later that person has died, again, it is normal and natural to have very strong feelings as a response to that. When we are having those strong feelings, it's also pretty natural and normal for our friends and family members who care for us to try and make us feel better. And sometimes, again, not always, but sometimes, their intent to make us feel better can have just the opposite reaction. And that's one of the things that is sometimes called toxic positivity. It's a lovely phrase, and what they mean by that is that sometimes people are in their attempt to help make us feel better, are maybe just really trying to make themselves feel better, and are glossing over the strong feelings that we might have. So, for example, we might have gone through something that's really devastating in our life. We share that with someone, and if they were too quickly coming in to say words like, oh, you'll get over it, or just be positive, or, don't dwell on that. People who give us those kinds of, just kind of brief encouragements to pass through those feelings quickly, not to process them, not to focus on them. Those feelings can make us feel unheard and unvalidated. They can seem insincere. They can also invite us to not share those feelings with those people. Again, they can turn off the opportunity for us to explore those feelings more deeply. Conversely, if we are fortunate and we are able to share this potentially strong feeling that we have in regard to a potentially important event or loss that we've had in our life, and the people that we share those feelings with are able to respond with validation and more hopeful responses, we have the opportunity or the invitation from that to sit with those feelings and to explore them, to reflect on what those mean, to craft a story that, again, might help us to be able to thrive even through these difficult times. Those kind of statements might sound more like, wow, thank you for telling me about that. This is really hard. You've done hard things before, and I believe in you, and I'm here for you, and I know that together we can get through this. I know that there's a lot that can go wrong, but I'm wondering if there's some things that might be able to go right. I'm hearing what you say, and it is normal to have some negativity in this situation. I'd be scared if I was facing that too. It's probably pretty hard to feel positive right now. I'm putting out all the good energy I can. I'm sending my thoughts and hopes and prayers, and I'm hopeful that you're going to be feeling much better very soon. And it's never fun to feel the way that you've described. Is there anything that we can do today where you might be able to feel a little bit better? And again, I think the key of those kind of phrases is that sense that the other person is comfortable enough in their own skin and strong enough to be able to tolerate the distressing feelings that you might be having. That person who's able to be a colleague, a friend, a support person, who's able to say, it's okay to be sad, to be frightened, to be angry, to be fearful. It's okay. I can sit with you through that. You're not alone. I've had those strong feelings too. When we can normalize those feelings for someone else, when we can be present for someone who's going through those feelings, that goes a long way toward helping us to be able to process them. One of the keys, one of the takeaways when we think about survivor's guilt is, again, being able to minimize regret. That's one of the phrases I use a lot in my social work practice. I think that's one of our goals in being a social worker, is to help the patients and families that we see to minimize any possibility of regret. Now, there's going to always be things where we can look back and say, woulda, coulda, shoulda, but our hope is to minimize those things by giving people what we might call anticipatory guidance. And what that means is to be able to look forward to a future and prepare for it in the best way possible, so that whatever choices we make and whatever outcomes that we might have to deal with, we'll feel as well prepared as we can and know that we made the best decisions that we could with the limited information that we had at the time. That goes a long way to help us to feel less guilty, less regret, and less distressed when we are living our lives in the most congruent way that we possibly can. So, for example, if a person is dealing with a very serious illness and we've tried to tell ourselves that bad things don't happen to good people, and one of our a colleague, a friend, a loved one is not able to survive their cancer experience, and we've told ourselves that only bad things happen to only bad people, we can set ourselves up for a lot of distress. So being able to recognize the ambiguity in life, to be able to recognize the fact that we can't predict always who is going to have a better outcome and who might have a worse outcome, and to recognize that a lot of things in life are not in our control, to be able to tolerate that. Again, it goes a long way toward helping us to manage the mystery that is absolutely a part of life. We wish in the healthcare side of the world, we wish that we could save every person. We wish that there was never a negative outcome. We wish that our treatments were more effective for more people more of the time. We wish that there were less distressing side effects and symptoms. We wish that we were able to predict which people would have a better experience and which people might not. We wish all of those things passionately and fervently, and do all that we can to try to increase our knowledge and increase our ability to predict and increase our ability to minimize distress. But we are human, and that means we're fallible. And as part of being human, we are designed to have mortality in our lives. So whether we die from our cancer or die from something much, decades later from some other catastrophe or event, unfortunately, the phrase again, survivor's guilt, reminds us that at some point we won't survive. So being able to make peace with our mortality is another aspect of dealing with these very difficult issues. Recognizing when a colleague, a friend, a family member does die, that we too need to be prepared for that possibility. Again, hopefully it's not soon, and hopefully it's not from our cancer. But at some point, we will not survive. And being able to have vicarious learning through this experience of someone else's death or sad experience offers us the opportunity to minimize our own regret. And that goes, again, a long way toward us being able to have peace of mind and to be able to thrive despite the experiences that we might face. So I believe that those are my main points that I wanted to share, and I want to maybe end my portion with just again inviting you to hear these words that are so very heartfelt. Please know how brave you are to call in and to consider these strong feelings that are a normal part of the cancer experience. Please know how appreciative I am of your courageous willingness to be reflective about the negative things that we have to face, and how in awe I am of the strength and resilience that I see from the people living with cancer each day. And with that, I will turn over the time to our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Shirley. We really appreciate you just bringing your experience and helping people and giving this wonderful feedback on ways to try to handle these very difficult emotions. And yes, we are ready for our second speaker, Bridget Casey. Bridget is a two-time bone marrow transplant survivor. She has had a career as a research product development scientist in corporate America and as a hospice chaplain. Currently, she resides in Stockton, California. She's focused on completing a second doctorate degree. She's also a volunteer chaplain with the Law Enforcement Chaplaincy Sacramento and a volunteer bone marrow stem cell career with Be the Match. Bridget, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's truly an honor to be able to share my story. And before I start, I'll say I know you're going to hear a lot of similarities to what Shirley just shared or what I will share. I'll just jump into my story. In 1999, while I was working as a professional research product development scientist in corporate America, I started having symptoms of fatigue and easy bruising. In 2001, approximately 1.5 years and 8 doctors later, I was diagnosed by Dr. Schiller at UCLA with PNH. In 2004, he introduced me to one of his patients. This individual happened to be a professional baseball figure. We were of the same age and at the same point in our battle with PNH. We shared our stories with one another. He shared that he flew in from out of state once a month to see my doctor. He had followers, people that were following his life at home. He also shared that he had a group of researchers researching a cure for PNH. He told me that he would rather die than give up baseball. He had people who relied on his being successful. He had people looking to save his life. It was determined that his sister was a match, and he made the decision to have a bone marrow transplant. A few months later, he died while undergoing his transplant. In 2005, I left corporate America because of my PNH and began studying part-time for a Master of Divinity degree with the goal of going into chaplaincy work. In 2008, I was told that it was time to make the decision about having a bone marrow transplant. A matched, unrelated donor was found, but I feared that I might die like others I knew. I knew only of 3 people who underwent bone marrow transplants. including the baseball figure, but none survived. On September 11th, 2008, I had a very successful transplant. I encountered survivor's guilt when I thought about those whom I knew that didn't make it, who had families that they left behind. They had people to live for, people to care for. The baseball personality had a team of researchers trying to help him, and his sister was a donor. Why didn't he make it? I was just a scientist. I did not have my own family. I didn't feel that my life was of as much value to society compared to other people whom I knew that didn't make it. Back in 2009, I was diagnosed with epilepsy caused by one of the drugs, cyclosporin, that was used before and a short time after my transplant. This epilepsy prevented me from doing some of the things I wanted to do and from having a job as a chaplain. I viewed this as only decreasing my value in society. Because of needing a transplant and having epilepsy, some in my faith community viewed me as being punished by God for something I or relatives did in the past. Also, some viewed me as demon-possessed or involved in the occult. What value did I have in the world? I would ask. The views of some in my faith only decreased my value to society. Why was I allowed to live when others who had much more to live for died? In 2014, I had successful brain surgery at UCSF, so no more epilepsy. I was able to get a job as a hospice chaplain and begin dreaming and planning a full life again. In 2015, I began working on a second doctorate to advance my career as a chaplain. In 2018, I was planning a trip to Germany to meet my donor on the 10th anniversary of my transplant. But I noticed that I was fatigued and bruising easily. And part of the fatigue I assumed was part of my job. I was a full-time chaplain, and there was a second full-time chaplain that walked out on his job one day. I went from 32 patients to 51. So I attributed my fatigue to that. But in 2018, while planning a trip to Germany, that was the 10th year anniversary, I became sick again. I had relocated to Northern California, so I went to a local doctor who, after seeing concerning blood work, sent me to a local oncologist. The local oncologist staff informed me that they were not interested in determining what was wrong with me because I was too old for insurance companies to cover any treatments. I was told that I had almost 10 good years after my transplant and that I should just accept the next page of my life. I was devastated. Why was I allowed to start dreaming again and have it all taken away? Why didn't I just die during the transplant like the others I knew? While still in the car at the doctor's office, I emailed Dr. Schiller at UCLA. He immediately took me back as a patient and within 2 months diagnosed me with MDS. 6 months later, I had a second transplant with another unrelated donor. This time my match was from England. This transplant was also successful. Occasionally, I was reminded of some of my young patients who died so early in life. Why did they die? And I get 2 second chances at life? They had families. They were viewed as valuable by society. When I focused on my feelings of not being of value and others were, I came to the realization that by my choosing to have 2 transplants showed that I had value. I was valuable to myself. I also believe that my faith helped me to see value in myself. Why did God create me and bring the right doctor and staff into my life to save my life if he viewed me as of no value. Now I focus on what I can and do to have a fulfilling, enjoyable life. I've continued focusing on the realization that being alive is a value to me. I am also valued by God. Currently, I am finishing up the second doctorate, volunteering as a law enforcement chaplain with the Law Enforcement Chaplaincy of Sacramento, and volunteering as a stem cell bone marrow courier for Be the Match. I find these activities fulfilling. I'm also dreaming again of visiting now both of my donors who live in Europe, and I hope this dream is fulfilled when COVID is better controlled and Europe is open for tourists. Occasionally, when I do think of those who did not make it and begin to feel a little bit of survivor's guilt, I try to remind myself that I have value. I value myself and God values me. I don't anymore define my value by society's view of my value. Thank you so much for allowing me to share my story.
Oh, Bridget, I so appreciate your authenticity and your story. I think a lot of people are going to relate to. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. I feel like that was really special. Now, I am sure that there are going to be people that want to ask questions. So, Todd, can you please share with everyone today how they can do this?
Yes. If you would like to ask a question, please signal by pressing *1 on your telephone keypad. If you were using a speakerphone, please make sure your mute function is turned off to allow your signal to reach our equipment. A voice prompt on the phone line will indicate when your line is open. Please state your name before posing your question. Again, press *1 to ask a question. We'll pause for just a moment to allow everyone an opportunity to signal for questions.
In the meanwhile, I'm going to offer one question up, and I'll direct it to you first, Bridget, and Shirley, if you want to add anything. One person wrote in, how do I best gently say I am cured with potential GVHD, in quotation marks, but when you talk to a person who might not have that cure, how do you speak to others who might not be getting what you have in your treatment?
That's a tough one. I've been kind of thinking about that. I don't personally like to use the word cure. I use more the word of in remission. Yeah, so if somebody were to ask me, I think I would say something like, well, I'm fortunate right now that I'm in remission. There are always challenges that may come my way, but, I feel very fortunate or lucky that I'm given a second chance for at least some time. I think that's how I'd probably maybe address that.
Okay, thank you.
I like
anything. Oh, I'm sorry.
Right. I was just going to follow up on that. Again, thank you, Bridget, for your story and for sharing your experiences with us as well. When I think that, and I'm making air quotes here so you can all see, but I think the word cure is such an interesting word, right? If we haven't lived through something that someone else has gone through, again, a cancer experience for today's talk, and we talk about the word cure, I think the kind of lay population might feel, the assumption might be that means that experience is behind us. It's no longer relevant. You're cured. It's done with. It's in the past. No longer have to think about it. There's a lot of kind of assumptions that go with the word cure. And Bridget, one of the things that was highlighted in your story, even after 10 years, cancer can rear its ugly head again. We might find ourselves needing to have treatment again. For many people who have had a serious diagnosis of some sort, even if it is no longer in a active phase, each time they go back, they have scan anxiety when they're following up with their doctors, when, just going into a hospital can be a traumatic experience, going in for even benign situations can trigger anxiety and upset. It is not it is typically not something that is one and done and put behind us and we no longer think about and it no longer affects us. And cure kind of implies all of those things that may not be very valid in our life. So I do agree that that cure is a very challenging word for an awful lot of folks. Again, there are no promises, there are no guarantees, and we might still, again, even decades later, still be finding ourselves living with the impact of either the disease itself or the treatment from the disease itself. Again, Bridget's story reminded us that the very best treatments that we had that saved her life also resulted in epilepsy, which is a very devastating consequence. And the question that the person typed in, again, suggests that the GVHD is potentially a very significant aspect of that person's recovery. And so, again, the very treatments that we give to prolong a person's life can result in potentially devastating impacts on our life as well. So cure is definitely a fraught word and one that can stir all kinds of feelings for people. But I think that, again, when we're at our best, we're able to, again, have real, intimate and deep discussions with people where we can let them know more about what our real experience is. So if we're talking to someone who's kind of casual about something, we might not go into this, a work colleague, at a coffee moment, we might not have these deep and profound discussions. But hopefully there are some people in our lives where we can explore our feelings related to the significant things that we've experienced and the significant losses that we've experienced and our concerns about folks and our memories about folks who, had different outcomes than we did, and perhaps our distress about the fact that maybe cancer isn't something that we currently have to worry about, but the treatment side effects and the symptoms that are long-lasting and lingering are still troublesome in our lives. So hopefully there are folks that we can share those feelings with deeply and honestly, and who can appreciate the nuance of what we are going through, that it isn't black and white, and it isn't I'm cured and it's all past, or I'm dealing with it and it's going to be a bad situation. There's everything is gray in all of this. Again, ambiguity is the hallmark of the cancer experience and the human experience.
Thank you so much. Todd, do we have anyone in our question queue?
At this time, we have no questions in queue.
Okay, then I am going to ask a couple of more that are pre-submitted. Could you remind everyone of how to ask a question, though, if they would like to?
Yes, again, to ask a question, please press star 1.
Okay. Another question we have here, I know we've spent some time talking about the survivor's guilt, and that was part of the question, but the second part says, I also feel like I am a shadow of my former self, and I miss the old me. Do you ever go back to feeling like the you that you were before the transplant? I'm so torn being here for my family, but not wanting to keep suffering now that I have relapsed. Trying to reconcile the two, but it's not happening. And, of course, thank you. Shirley, do you want to go with that one first?
There's so much to unpack in that. Again, I'm sending my thoughts out to that person who submitted the question. It's always interesting when we hear someone say, I want to go back. People want to reclaim, quote, the old normal. I want to go back to the way I was. I want things to be back in time. And kind of by definition, we can't do that. None of us have that capability. So if we spend our lives looking backwards versus forward, we certainly miss the view. So, it is, from a mental health perspective, it is probably not our best place to dwell, though, again, it's a normal thing to grieve. So the past is, by definition, past, and it's legitimate to grieve. It's legitimate to attempt to accept our feelings about the sadness that past is no longer going to be what is our experience today, but it is hopeful and helpful for us to be able to say, what can I do with where I am? And having that perspective, again, opens up lots of possibilities. So even though a person may have relapsed and may have fatigue and challenges with other kinds of symptoms that are, again, potentially quite distressing and again, maybe devastating, we can find meaning and purpose in our life. And that's, again, Bridget, thank you for sharing your story. You were able to say it doesn't matter how others in society might view and value us and rank us in some kind of hierarchy of this person is more appropriate to save and this one less so. The reality is that we all have value, and it's our perspective, and that's certainly the point of view that I want to stress to now. It's our story that matters, the story I tell myself. So being able to come to a place where you can see that there's still a purpose and value and meaning in your life is what allows us to go forward and to have the best quality of life possible. Many of you may be familiar with Viktor Frankl and the wonderful book that he was able to craft and write from the profound experience of living through the Holocaust. The most devastating experiences that a person could go through, and certainly an opportunity for survivor's guilt. In his book, Man's Search for Meaning, he postulates, he suggests that he believes that all of us have, again, an inherent desire to create meaning in our life. And I think, again, there's been a great deal of research that supports that, again, it's back to the story we tell ourselves, that we are created out of stardust and we are worthy to live and breathe on this planet, and what we have gifts that are of value. And whether I express those gifts and share those gifts from the point of view of a wheelchair or from my bed or from my perspective as a relatively healthy person, the point isn't the how I do it, it's that I see a way to do it, that I create a way to do it, that I can see that I can be reflective, that I can still, enjoy, other experiences, that there's other things that are meaningful in my life. Those are the things that matter. When I think about, the phrase again, negative feelings, one of the negative feelings that I hear so often people describe as negative is anger. And again, from my perspective, anger is energy. The question is, what do we do with that, right? So if we have anger, if we have the negative feelings, those are there to have us do something different. That's a biological nudge that we want to do something different, and the energy is there for us to do that. If we don't do something different, we get stuck in that, then again, a lot of bad things can happen. We want to be able to channel that energy, channel that anger, channel the sense of injustice in the world, channel the frustrations that we feel into some way that's productive and positive, that we can feel good about, that helps us to, again, emphasize the meaning and purpose that we can find in our life. I'm not sure if that fully responds to the person who raised that question. And if not, again, please type in or call in for us and let us know, and I'd be happy to explore that further.
Thank you. Any thoughts to add, Bridget?
In some ways, obviously my experience is not the same. But I could say my first transplant, I had next to no issues with GVHD. Second one I had, and still have, a few and that are quite bothersome. I loved being a scientist, but I'm not now, and I don't foresee myself in the future to be able to think at that level again. And I still grieve that once in a while, but as Shirley said, you can't always look back. I try to keep looking forward to what I can do now. I'm not as physically strong, but I'm also significantly older than during the first transplant. But I really try to look forward, yet at times I do feel sorry for myself and grieve a little bit about some of the past that I've lost. definitely try to keep the positive.
Thank you so much. And, just adding to that myself with this conversation, I think back to an interview I did with one of our peers. His name is Tom, and he's almost 20 years out from his transplant. And he was talking about those first few years after transplant. There is a lot of adjustment and there is a lot of change. And for anyone who's earlier in their journey, I want to remind you that this takes time to figure out who that new person is. I know in the beginning, Tom was a very athletic man that ran marathons and everything. And in the beginning, he shared a story with me about how he fell asleep in the bathtub. He was just so fatigued all the time, the simplest task, and he just couldn't handle it. But within 3 to 4 years, he was running again. Might not have been the way he was before, and he certainly experienced cognitive issues, just like Bridget was sharing. But now his focus he's shifted some things in his life. He shared a lot about, how he invests in his marriage and his grandchildren. And so his purpose, his meaning took on, those things, of course, were always important, but he's investing probably more of his time in different ways. And so if you're newer on the journey, just remember it takes time to figure out what is really going to be your norm. But also, Todd, any other callers in queue?
Again, at this time, we have no questions in queue.
Okay, well, I believe we had another question here, and I'll throw this one to Shirley. I would appreciate some discussion of feelings of anger at the patient because she let me down by getting sick. I'm sure this person, understands that was not in that person's control, but I think sometimes our emotions don't always equal what our logical brain says.
Absolutely. I appreciate the honesty of that, right? All of us, back to telling ourselves a story, right? We tell our stories of going forward. I certainly remember that reminds me of a particular patient and family member that I was seeing at one point in my career, where the woman came in, her husband was sick, and she came in and she closed the door and she said, I don't need you to say a word. I just need to tell you how upset I am at Henry. Henry worked all of his life. We didn't get to go on vacation. We didn't do family trips. We didn't do all these things because he was working to build a wonderful retirement. And we put everything off. We'd lived our lives spare and minimal so that we'd have money in retirement so that we could travel the world. And he promised me every year on our anniversary, not this year, but someday we're going to go to Italy. We're going to go to Rome. We're going to have a chance to see the Colosseum. We're going to, and he would promise me these things. And she looked at me when she was fuming. She was so angry. And she goes, and the week he put in for his retirement, he was diagnosed with in his case, lung cancer. He was diagnosed with this illness, and he smoked, and he brought this on, and now we can't do these things, and now I'm working to take care of him, and I can't go, and I can't travel, and I'm older now, and I'm not going to be able to, and I will never go to Italy, and it's his fault. And she was furious. And I don't know if the person who expressed the question feels similarly, but perhaps so. That sense of, it's not fair, it's not right. I deserve better. This wasn't what was promised. This isn't the deal I signed up for. And it was interesting, that anger was so raw and so real. But over time, just again, as our wonderful Jennifer has just reminded us, over time, sometimes our perspective can change. And indeed, I was able to witness an amazing transformation. That particular couple grew closer together than one could imagine. And the intimacy that they shared through his illness was so touching. And she was able to, be at his bedside and take care of him in the most loving and caring and warm way, again, just breathtaking. And at one point, as she was walking out of his room, I caught up to her and reminded her of that earlier outburst. And she looked at me and she goes, "I just needed to vent." And she kind of laughed it off. And I remember, being in awe of and trying to express that to her, how I was in such awe of how well she had adjusted and coped. And, she goes, you could tell she was, kind of deciding whether or not to just keep walking or to share more. And I was blessed that she decided to share more. So, she said, "If you've got a minute," and of course I did. And so we found a quiet little spot and she sat down and she described how important it was for her to get that out, to express her anger and she said, and I told Harry, or Henry, sorry, you have to remember his name. I told him, all of the things I just told you. And I yelled at him and I screamed at him and I told him how angry I was. And he said, "And you don't think I'm angry?" He goes, I'm the one who planned for this wonderful things. I lived my life for that. He goes, "I'm angry. I'm disappointed." And she goes, and then he cried and said how sad he was that he had disappointed me. And she goes, then I felt like such a buffoon. And, we hugged and I told him I forgave him for being a, silly old man. And he said he forgave me for being a silly old woman. And we looked at each other and we said, we'll do the best we can. And as I tell you the story, I want to cry because it was just so real. She was just being human, and feelings are feelings. And, she didn't live with them. She didn't stay with them. She expressed them and then she moved on. And then the feelings that she had to the man that she'd been married with for 100 years, surfaced, and they moved on in their life, and they watched movies about Italy, and they talked about, they had a documentary on the Colosseum, and they did some of that. And then after a while, they were like, eating pizza's enough. And they kind of laughed about that. And when he was so sick that he couldn't enjoy his food or enjoy conversations even, he became very ill, I'm afraid. She, would just hold his hand, and she was able to say, "I'm so lucky to be able to spend this time at his bedside." And I read to him. And again, her expectations of what their life together were able to modulate in a way, they were able to adapt in a way that she could still find grace in the moment, and she could still find love in being with the person that she had been married to. And she was still able to find joy and purpose and meaning in her life. And when she was telling me this story, she goes, "These are some of the richest months of our marriage." I was so touched by that. And I share that with you in that I think that the resilience that people have is absolutely breathtaking. We can find beauty and peace and wonderful things when we search for those things, when we're able to let go of our expectations and are able to be open to the good that is in life. I think so often about the, kind of lesson maybe we learned in kindergarten, but if you have a container and it is at the halfway mark with liquid, we have the choice to see whether it's half full or half empty. And if we live our lives bemoaning the fact that it's half empty, we will not experience the joy that is there if we see the exact same experience and see it as being half full. The person whose experience perspective is it's half empty will feel frustrated and angry and fearful that somebody else is going to get some, and oh my gosh, I don't have enough and I can't share, and poor me, and how awful it is and how terrible, and I deserve more, and all of those feelings will escalate. And the person who sees their container as half full will say, Bridget, are you thirsty? Can I share? Look, I've got half still in my bottle. I'm happy to give you some. And this amount is the same. It's our perspective that's different. The other thought that I have is that feelings are an analogy that works for me about feelings is that it's as if we are on a multi-storied building, and there's an elevator. And we get off the elevator on a certain floor, and we like it or we don't like it, but we have the ability to get back on the elevator and go to a different floor and explore different things. And some of us go to the basement, and we open the door, and it's dark and scary and cold, and we forget where the elevator is, and we stay stuck in the basement, and we are angry and upset and frustrated, and yet we all have the capability of getting back on the elevator and exploring a different floor. So if we can see feelings as just transitory, they just are, and sometimes the door opens up and it's the elevator, and we check it out, it's the basement, we check it out, and we experience it. But if we're wise enough and fortunate enough to be able to find the elevator again, we get back on it and we push another button and we explore what's on that floor. And by definition, it's different because life is always different. Again, we can't go back. That's still one of the principles. But if we can find the beauty that's on that floor, and remember that this too will pass. Again, all of life is transitory. It's all going to change, whether it's a good floor or bad, and if we can have that perspective, we can often do much better in life.
Such wisdom. Anything to add, Bridget?
Oh, no. I feel very fortunate that I didn't have to deal with angers from loved ones. I'm sorry, I'm losing my voice. No, but thank you so much.
I just got
wonderful answer. Yeah. That was a wonderful, wonderful answer. That was beautiful.
Absolutely. I also want to remind people, too, and before I say this, Todd, anyone in queue?
Yes, actually, Jennifer, we do have a couple questions in queue.
Oh, then I will put my comments aside, and let's get to our first caller.
Caller, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Heather, and I'm 48 years old, and I was diagnosed with lymphoma when I was 45 years old. I had just became an empty nester where my kids had grown up, and kind of like along the story that you were saying, it wasn't my husband who was mad. I'm almost mad, like, for myself. I had autologous stem cell transplant, and I just actually passed 2 years out, which is great. But I feel so different now compared to what I did.
Shirley, do you want to answer the anger with herself as well as the emotions of what she's going through right now?
Of course. Thank you, Heather, for calling in. And again, I'm so sorry that you've had to have such a challenging experience. I think back to our anger is energy. The question that I always think about is, how can I direct that anger? What is it that I can do with it? If I'm not able to direct it outward, then it gets directed inward and we become depressed and probably not a lot of fun to be with or to experience for ourselves. Being able to direct the anger outward gives us, again, a chance to do something with that can help us to feel stronger and perhaps better. But it is certainly legitimate to feel angry. Again, this isn't what you signed up for. It isn't how you anticipated your life to go. It isn't fair. It isn't fun. Those are all legitimate things to experience and to grieve. I think, so much is, if we can normalize the experience and to say, this is where I am. This is the road that I currently am on, and I'm doing, when we can tell ourselves, back to the narrative that we tell ourselves, if we can tell ourselves we're doing the best we can under the circumstances that we're in, then
I think
that's
too. I think too, it's made it worse with COVID. Like, I had just finished my stem cell transplant where I had to stay away from people for 6 months, and I had a month or two where I could, quote unquote, be normal again. And then COVID hit. And ever since COVID, like, I'm stuck home, you know?
Right. No, you're absolutely
I think that
100%
has made
right.
it 100% worse.
Sure. And no one saw that coming. No one could have anticipated that we were going to have this pandemic. No one knew, how long, that these isolation recommendations were going to last. All of those things are absolutely contributing factors. And again, outside of your control. One of the themes that you might be hearing through today is that however we experience our spirituality, that can be an important sense of regrounding for many people. That sense that many faith traditions offer us reminders that we don't get to write we don't get to necessarily pick the path that we're on. That again, our challenge is to do the best we can on the path that we're on, to bloom where we're planted, all those good sayings, right? What can I do under this set of circumstances? How can I live the best quality of life possible under this particular set of circumstances? That's kind of our ongoing, as humans, that's kind of our ongoing challenge. And to the degree that we can find supportive loved ones who can help us in that, and supportive community that can remind us of that, and supportive texts and wisdom traditions that can remind us of that, I think that all helps us to keep that in mind. But my heart goes out to you. I certainly can imagine how frustrating it is and how unfair it seems. But hopefully, again, you have access to the electronic wonders of our world and can video outreach and do calls like this so that you know and can get reminders that you're not alone and that others are also struggling with some of these same concerns or issues.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Shirley. I know that we have gone past the hour, so it is time for us to end today, but a thank you to both of our speakers. The information here, the dialogue, the authenticity, I think really just gave our viewers some wonderful tips to move forward. I also want to remind people, because I also heard with Heather as she was sharing her information, that the guilt with yourself. As a reminder, cancer does not discriminate. I just want to tell you, I've been in oncology over 20 years, and I have held the hands of joggers. I've held the hands of vegetarians. I've held the hands of very healthy people starting chemo treatment and people that make all kinds of great choices. But I can tell you that sometimes there are just things that are outside of our control. If you have blood, you can have blood cancer. If you have breasts, you can have breast cancer. It's not a matter of how perfect you are. It's just a matter of what hand you are dealt in life. And so anyway, on that note, again, thank you for everyone being with us today. Stay tuned. There'll be some information coming out about our Lunch and Learn next month on acute lymphoblastic leukemia. And if we can be of any help here at the Link to anyone, you can reach out to 1-800-LINK-BMT. Everyone have a great day.